Maximum is 120 seconds. And this would be the summary of each class. So the past 2 sessions, if you can summarize it. One of my teachers in fiqh used to always say, anybody can elaborate. Any fool can elaborate. But only a true learned person can summarize. Why is that? Only someone who actually knows what they're talking about can summarize. Why do you think? What's the difference? Yeah. Well, that's the implication here, but why? What difference does it make? You think that elaborating means you understood it. I can explain it further and further, right? You ever had one of those, you have to write 3 pages or minimum 3 pages for your final? So what do? You do research. Oh, that's you maybe. What did I used to do? You just fill in, just blabber and rhetoric and whatever you can do, just make it longer and longer and longer. Whereas what our teacher used to do, one of our teachers used to actually say shorter. He used to bring this back and make it shorter. I'm not going to read 3 pages of your nonsense. Make it 1 page. And that's when you have to, so what do you have to do here? You have to summarize it. He's not going to accept any old, you have to know you're not going to get the first half. Like you got to be able to bring this, what the Prophet ﷺ said, Utitu jawami al-kalima, aw kama qala sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. He said Allah gave him, one of the gifts that Allah gave him was comprehensive speech. And there's an Arabic expression, khayrul kalami ma qalla wa dal. The best of speech is that which is succinct, but it fulfills the purpose. So the shorter, the less you can say less and mean more, right? So anyway, our project, inshallah, our competition, every single session, and you can do the past 2 as well. Whoever can, it's open to everybody individually or as groups. Summarize the lesson in 1 to 2 minutes of video. So go back home, it's your homework, record yourself, or do it as a team, come up with a script or a summary, record yourself and submit it, inshallah, to the masjid. To the group, okay. Put it in our group, in the WhatsApp. If you're not in, then see the admin so they can add you. And then, inshallah, I'll be choosing 1 winner for each session, and there will be prizes for each session, inshallah, right? So 12 different prizes. And let's see, may the best group or person win, inshallah. All right, those are our 2 announcements. Now, I want to hear 2 voices reminding us of something we learned last week. Yes? Okay, so the authenticity and the message. So you're close. What makes Islam unique versus all the other faiths, in my observation, is that its authenticity outranks authenticity outranks. These are statements that we should be making confidently. From an objective historical analysis, the authenticity or verification, the ability to verify the origin or the historic roots of the scripture that claims to be of divine origin, Islam outranks all the others, and the message of Islam is unique in its rational and beautiful approach. Okay, great. One more voice of a recap of what we covered. Something that you took last week. Somebody's got to give me something. Yes.
We discussed in the beginning a summary of why we believe in general, and differentiation of why we have to specify belief in specifically.
Yes, Jazakallah khairan. Thank you so much. We challenged. First off, we went through why for quite a while, and I made a very big point. A lot of people don't spend a lot of time on the why. I spent 2 sessions on it, and I would spend longer, in fact. But I am a firm believer that the why is the most important part. I took a show of hands here. We were all born as Muslims, alhamdulillah. So there's a lot of what. There's a lot of the content. What should you be doing? What should you not be doing? Here's what you should believe in, and you're expected to just memorize it. We believe in angels. Okay, I believe in angels. You believe that there's paradise. Okay, I believe in paradise. You're just told what to believe. There's not enough emphasis on the why. And I'm a firm believer that once the why is sufficiently produced in somebody's heart, somebody really has answered the why I should believe, why Islam specifically, why should I go through this in life, then they're going to find the what no matter what you do. Now they're so motivated. If they can't find it here, they're going to find it elsewhere. They're going to continue searching until they find it, because the why is the flame, is the spark that gets their flame burning, and also the spark that keeps their flame going. So when they're challenged, they always fall back on the why. When you're a young kid and you're following your parents' footsteps, You just put on the hijab because mom has the hijab. You pray because mom and dad pray. But then you go to high school and college, and now you start challenging your beliefs. The only thing that's going to save you in that case is the why. Why should I keep believing? Why should I keep going? Now you guys, alhamdulillah, we spent a good amount of time with those answers, alhamdulillah. Jazakallah khair. Very, very powerful. Okay, so now we moved on. We did 2 sessions out of our 12 on the why, right? And before we move on to the what, basically the rest of our 10 sessions are about what? The content. We're talking about aqeedah, right? Our belief system. It's all content. We believe in this. We'll talk about why here and there all the time because I always refer back to that. But it's about what now? What do we believe in? And how do we believe in and so on. But before we get to the what, which is the bulk of our content, I want to just spend a moment with where. What does where mean here in this context?
Where do we derive from?
Yes, thank you. Where do we get our sources from? We talked about validating our source and that kind of thing. So what are our sources? If you had to number them, how many sources of aqeedah, or aqeedah right here, right? How many sources of aqeedah do we have? What do you quantify as a source of beliefs? So I believe in angels. Where do you get that from? So you mentioned, can you say again? Quran and Sunnah. So you limit them to 2. You want to stick with that? Or is there more?
How do you want to stick to it?
Okay. So you say Quran and Sunnah. The Quran is understood, right? It's the book of Allah. It's 604 pages. We have it, you could have an app for it. It's the same all over. Sunnah. Define Sunnah. Can you define Sunnah? Okay, Jazakallah khairan. There you go. He has the definitions ready. It's very important. And it's not about memorizing. I'm not a big memorizer. But it's important. Memorization is part of learning, and it's important in our faith as well. But if you don't understand what you're saying, you run into a problem, right? Anybody want to add on to that? Yes. Would I consider hadith distinct from sunnah? No. Hadith is part of the sunnah. So hadith, they can be, it's one of those things in the Arabic language which you find a lot, and we're going to talk about actually later today. إذا اجتمع افترق وإذا افترق اجتمع. Basically, if hadith and sunnah are used in the same paragraph, they're very likely that you're using them distinctively. Like, well, the sunnah is a bigger part and the hadith is one. Hadith means speech. That's literally, like, linguistically, it means the spoken word of the Prophet ﷺ. But obviously, if you use it alone, you're referring to the entirety of the sunnah, right? Do you know any other examples of such things? When you refer to the part, but you mean the whole. But when you refer to but if they come together in a conversation, then no, you're referring to them distinctively. Yeah. Do you know? I thought you had your hand up. We'll get to it now, inshallah. It'll be very clear in a second. I don't want to, when we get to the what at the end of the session. But yeah, it's a very common phenomenon in all language. I should have brought more examples, but there's a very clear-cut one in our faith anyway. Bismillah. All right. So anybody else? Can anybody name other sources other than Quran and Sunnah? Where do we derive our faith from? Where can you derive your faith from? 1, Quran, of course. And 2, Sunnah. Anybody have any other ideas? What about scholars? People say, Abu Hanifa said this, therefore I believe in it. Or I do it, I act upon it. Imam Ahmad, rahimahumullah jami'an, said this. What about the Sahaba? All right, let's see here. How many people here, let's think of anything. Okay, Salat al-Asr. You pray when the sun is, let's make it an easier one. Salat al-Dhuhr. You pray when the sun has just passed its zenith. Where do you get that from? Have you ever asked yourself, where do I confirm? You just say, when the phone tells me to pray, right? Well, have you ever double checked? Wait, how do I know my dhuhr is proper? Right? So have you ever broken down or challenged the beliefs that you have, the actions that you follow? Why is this important? Because last week we mentioned at the end there, and some people laughed at it. If you go to YouTube and you watch like certain behaviors that people who are other faiths, but also in Islam, people who are Muslim, just like you, but they do certain activities that people might find funny, like dancing around and saying this is prayer and stuff like that. And people laughed. And I said, well, as far as they're concerned, that's worship. So what right do you have to say, no, that's not Islam? Yeah. Oh, sorry. Yeah, go ahead, sister.
I'm not sure how to materialize this in terms of the source, but when you say that you're determined.
Great.
I don't know how that would, what the source that would consider.
Yes, exactly. And I'm glad now we're picking it apart, because everyone will say, well, I was born and raised with this, or I was just, since I was young, I was told this is fine to do. You know, those people who go to like those so-called faith leaders who, like, you pay them money, they do all kinds of like so-called magic or voodoo or whatever. They say, well, here, I'm going to heal you. And they rub their hand on people and say, well, I've healed you and I've done this and like that. There's a lot of people who believe in that, and these people make a lot of money. And you might find it very silly. But who are you to say, regardless of whether you find it silly or approve or whatever, the point is, who are you to say it's wrong or it doesn't belong in Islam? Now, I'm not here to say judging people for what they do in their faiths or whatever, but you're saying, no, that's not Islam. That's a powerful statement. That's a confident statement to make. My faith, or the Islamic faith, does not allow that behavior. You have to be able to define, which we're going to now, your sources, which I'll make it as simple as possible. This is a concept called masadir at-tashri', or basically the sources of our legislation, the sources of our faith, basically our belief. In this case, let's say the sources of our aqeedah, our belief system. And you're absolutely right, it is Quran and Sunnah. Everything else that I mentioned, I was hoping people would challenge me. If you go open a book on usul al-fiqh, they're going to list 10. They have al-qiyas, which is analogy or analytical thinking, right? Let's see, I don't want to write them. So you have qiyas, analytical thinking. You have shar'u man qablana, legislations that come before us. You have qawl al-sahabi or ra'y al-sahabi, the opinions of the sahaba. You have al-qawa'id al-fiqhiyah, the principles of fiqh. They can give you 10 or 12. So every single one after Quran and Sunnah is absolutely reliant on Quran and Sunnah. It's not a primary source. It can't stand alone for fiqh and usul reasons, which I don't want to get into. I'll just give you a brief glimpse. In qawa'id fiqhiyah, basically the governing principles of our faith, every single last one of the primary qawa'id fiqhiyah is derived from multiple instances of Quran and multiple instances of Sunnah. It's one of the most famous and most established principles in Islamic deen. Every single madhab across the board approves of it and considers it one of the most important principles for our belief system and our actions as Muslims. And it can stand alone, and it does stand alone. Why? Not because it challenges Quran and Sunnah, it's because it was derived from so many instances of Quran and Sunnah that you can no longer say that's where it derives its energy from or its strength from, that we don't need to go and verify it every time now. We're going to reinvent the wheel every generation. It stands alone on the basis because it's basically 10 ayat and 10 hadiths put together, basically, if you want to just simplify it. So yeah, I just don't want to confuse you on that. You'll find, I forgot the number, like the max you'll find in a book, 14 or 12, but every single last one of them is reliant on Quran and Sunnah. Analytical thinking, when you say, when the Prophet says, kullu muskirin haram, kullu muskirin khamr, kullu khamrin haram, everything that intoxicates is haram, or during his time they only knew like certain types of intoxicants. New ones are invented today or produced or chemically or derived or discovered. You'll say, well, by value of qiyas, we can attribute that it has the same kind of properties, therefore it'll carry the same kind of ruling. You've created a brand new ruling about a brand new situation, but you based it on an existing ruling or a similar ruling in Quran or Sunnah, right? There's no hadith or ayah telling us about making wudu with snow, for example, or doing jam'ah of salah if it's snowing or any of that regard. But obviously, we can attribute, we derive our faith from those kind of things based on the fact that a similar ruling exists in the Quran and Sunnah. So these are literally our two. I want to erase this just so lack of confusion, because you will find these if you're studying more in depth, and they're great. They're really great for us to understand our faith on a deeper level. And they all have logical or textual approaches, but all roads have to lead back to Quran and Sunnah. Okay? When it comes to the basics of our faith, you find, well, it doesn't. Why is this even up for discussion? Like why you spent 10 minutes talking about Quran and Sunnah? It's because of what we run into today. And the further away, like you ever seen one of those things where For example, if you draw a circle, and if you, as soon as you're right down the middle, let's say that's when the Prophet ﷺ passed away, right? He passed away, and then somebody changes something 1%. So far, let's say, so 1%, so far, if I drew a line here, and then someone, or 1 degree rather, right? So someone makes a 1 degree, how many degrees in the circle? 360, right? So someone changed it 1 degree, where would I draw the line? 359, but how would it appear on this circle? Like, I could barely, right? It'd be touching. You wouldn't even tell the difference. You couldn't tell unless you got, zoomed out a little bit, or zoomed in rather, right? So 1 degree didn't make a difference. But the further out we go, if the circle is really big, the further out we go, it starts to separate. Correct? So 1400 years later, that 1 degree, you changed things. You started sourcing things from other origins. You started playing around with the sources. Now it's an unrecognizable faith. 1400 years later or 1500 years later, right? I'll give you an example. I don't know if this is controversial in our day and age, but it's a very topical example that just happened last month. Christmas in the Christian religion, when it first was introduced, it obviously didn't exist. I forgot how many hundreds of years ago. When it was first introduced, it was referred to as literally a bid'ah, an innovation in their faith, and many of them rejected it or refused to participate. Slowly but surely, it became staple. Now it becomes, if you don't participate, you're not Christian enough. Or have you ever heard of a Christian who doesn't choose to participate in Christmas? Anybody ran into one of those? So it's fascinating. How can something that was invented or introduced hundreds of years after Christ was no longer with them, and now it became, well, if you don't do this, you're not a true Christian. Wait a second. How does that happen? And the worry, the fear is that what if that happens? What if that has happened to your faith? What if something you're doing now is something that completely the Prophet ﷺ neither taught nor does he approve of? And now it's said, well, if you don't do it, you're not a true Muslim. You ever thought of that? So you got to challenge a lot of the things that you're doing, but you challenge them in a good way by saying, well, as long as I can source them to the Quran or source them to the Sunnah, then it's true Islam. And as long as I can't source it to the Quran and I can't source it to the Sunnah, then it's not true Islam. Sometimes it's really that simple. Does that make sense? Anybody have any questions? Yes.
How do Shias go on believing what they believe if what they source is also contrary?
Well, this is where you have a problem. And so this is a very essential question. And that's exactly what we're talking about here. Shias, just from a historical context. And of course, I'm going to have a bias. We have a Sunni background, right? So we're going to have a bias. So I'm going to try to keep the bias out of it. Historically speaking, the Shias, in terms of the distinction of having a Shia sect or Shia approach, only showed up after the death of the Prophet. And it showed up in times of it was a political approach before it was ever introduced to the Aqeedah. This is just a historical record. It's not even up for discussion. So before there was Aqeedah differences, there was political differences. Well, we don't prefer this Sahabi to have been the first Khalifa. We actually would prefer Ali and so on, and the lineage and blood relation and so on and so forth. So point being, yes, they have more masalih. And I say they, the Shias are a large amount. There's segments of them. I haven't studied their books well, but I do know for a fact that segments of them will the ones who are different from the Sunni Shalifs, they have the same kind of view. They'll say, yeah, our differences are very minor. We don't believe in all these extra things that you attribute to us, like the Quran has changed, or we don't believe in the infallibility of imams or any of that stuff. However, I do know those what is referred to as Itna Ashariya Shia, the ones who believe in the 12 imams. They believe in the infallibility, so they'll have this 3 here. Number 3, the imams, they're infallible. How can the imams do something and you tell me it's wrong? That doesn't make sense. Just like telling me a prophet taught us something haram or taught us something wrong. So then, once you've added an imam, once you've added a source, so now the Quran can teach me something, the Sunnah can teach me something, but now number 3 can teach me something. And as long as you convince me that number 3 said, for example, you don't have to wear hijab anymore. Or, as some Shia do, the 5 salawat are 3 now. You can do Jannah forever with no requirement or any of that stuff, right? As long as you can convince me that something that is not present here, and is not present here, but is present in number 3, now you're changing the faith. At first, it might not seem like much. The further away you go, you're like, whoa, this faith has completely transformed. And it can all be rooted down to number 3. And the kicker here is that, again, from just an objective historical analysis, a lot of what gets attributed to the imams, because frankly speaking, at least the first handful of the 12 imams that the Shias ascribe a lot of teachings to, they were good Muslims. They were good Muslim people. They were bloodline of the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. So you see a text attributed to them. You're like, I have a hard time believing somebody who is lineage of the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, the descendant of the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, would say something like this. So you go back and you do some historical verification. It's not easy in our day and age. Like, oh, well, it's easier than before, but it requires some level of specialization. And you're like, wait, this is not like if we were to put it into the process of hadith verification, it would be da'if. And that would be for the majority of the controversial statements that get attributed to the early imams. So you're like, not only did they add a third source, it's the same concept we were talking about with other scriptures with respect. You can't even verify that it goes back to that source. So I understand you love Imam Ja'far, radiallahu anhu. I understand you love Isa alayhi salam, radiallahu anhu. But you can't even verify that this statement that you're following, that you're acting upon, was said by him. So, like, you've made him a source, which he shouldn't have been, and then you believe something that you claim he said, which you can't even attribute to the source. So you're several layers in here. And that's the problem that they run into. So and by the way, Sunni Muslims do that a lot as well, where legislation might say it can change things and so on. Well, now you have a big problem. You have a big problem because now things will absolutely change because they're not infallible. They were not sent by God. They're just a human like me and you. And they're definitely going to make mistakes. And it's definitely going to contradict Quran and Sunnah. And you're going to have a problem on your hands now. Like when they say that the magic and they come and they heal you, or they do the dances and stuff and say this is ibadah too, or they invent certain types of prayers, or millions. What other examples do you guys got? Pretty much any shift, yes. Music as part of worship. Now, whatever your opinion on music in terms of for entertainment purposes, but as part of worship, is it found here? Is it found here? It is derived later on by people where they've completely shifted, away from our sources of legislation for our belief system. Now again, that's besides the point of is music halal in terms of enjoyment, separate from ibadah. So I'm drilling this point home because it's really that simple. If somebody claims something to you, says, "Oh, we should do this," here's a rule of thumb. People tend to drift the most away from our roots when highly charged moments, highly emotional moments, weddings, funerals, what else? Celebrations, holidays, things where the primal human nature comes out more, and you don't want to be told what to do, and you're like, "I'll override." Like you can't fight the instincts and the emotions and so on. So you run into those problems the most. People are like, "Don't talk to me. This is how we do things," and that's that. So you see all kinds of innovative things and certain rituals and so on that pop up in weddings. They pop up in funerals all the time. They pop up in holidays and so on. And they say, "What's the big deal? Leave me alone. Let me just do it." And say, "Hey, listen, you can do what you want, but don't ascribe it to Islam, and don't say Islam allowed this unless you can source it to our root sources." Okay? Any other questions? Yes.
I imagine she has had scholars too, right?
Oh, for sure.
So how do they not see that contradiction?
Even within the Sunnis who believe in these kind of things, they will. I don't claim to have read deeply into it, but you can find a lot of these things on YouTube where there's debates about these kind of things. It's not really my cup of tea in terms of like the debates and the back and forth, but it is. I think it would be, if someone like yourself who's curious about it, it would definitely be worth taking a look. And I could let's be in touch, inshallah. I can direct you to one or two videos. I had watched one a few weeks back, which was definitely resourceful, was respectable, and just the arguments made, like how can you verify X, Y, Z, and a lot of it, with respect, a lot of it again, it just fits under. If we were to categorize it from a historical record standpoint, it would be da'if, and that's where it ends for me. But it doesn't end there for other people. They'll say, "No, it's only da'if because there was a political oppression from the Sunnis and so on." And he's like, "Well, a lot of now I'm telling you an objective historical record analysis. This does not meet the minimum criteria for us to consider a valid source of an objective historical fact that occurred. If I tell you your great grandfather did X, Y, Z, you're like, I don't believe you would do that. And I say, well, I have a record. You're like, okay, show me the record. We go to the library and bring it, and it's like, well, It's a source that can be attributed to a person who died 300 years after your great-great-grandfather died. That's the earliest source we could find of the record that your grandfather did something, unbecoming. Are you going to accept that? Well, I guess it's true. There's a record. There is a record, but it's a very weak record. It's not enough to. It doesn't meet the burden of proof. So that becomes problematic. And some people say, well, no, that's enough of a burden of proof for me. And that's where the differences, disagreements, and frankly speaking, the vast majority of people, and I think we're amongst them, which is why we're here seeking knowledge, the vast majority of people don't know that, and they don't take it into account. And I think that if it was brought to their attention, and they were able to verify it, because they should verify it, because obviously I'm going to be biased, they should verify that it's true, they would double check, or now they would have reason to doubt some of the things that they believe and say, well, I have to relook at everything. I have to, if I've been taught a lot of things that cannot be verified, cannot be brought to the sources that I believe and I love, the prophets, God, then I have a lot of soul searching to do, and I have a lot of research to do to arrive at, well, now it becomes a question of, do I want to be right, or do I want to get to God? If I want to be right, if that's my goal, then no, forget it. I refuse. I'm going to look like a fool. What am I? I've been wrong for 30 years? No, I'm right and you're wrong, and we can disagree for the rest of it forever. But if somebody goes like, no, I guess if what you're saying is true and it's verifiable, like I can look it up from a historical record standpoint, then my refusal to look it up is just me putting my head in the sand because I'm afraid for it to be true, and now I have to check everything. And that's a journey that we all have to go on at some point. And that's what we're doing now with this foundation. I'm asking you basic things like, how can you even verify your prayer? How can you verify that the Prophet prayed the way that you pray? Right? How can you verify that the beliefs that you have? You believe in angels. Where can you source that from? You believe in angels, right? Where is it found? Quran. Can you give me an ayah that mentions angels? Surah Al-Malaika? Sorry? Any ayah, one ayah.
آمن الرسول ما أنزل إليه من ربه والمؤمنون كل آمن بالله وملائكته وكتبه
You found the perfect one. I would have just wanted any ayah that mentions angels at all. But you mentioned the perfect one that it just says the whole, it summarizes it. كل آمن بالله وملائكته وكتبه ورسله. You're mentioning four of the pillars of our faith. A true believer believes in Allah and His messengers and His angels and His books. So it's as good as it gets. But the angels, are mentioned tens of times, if not hundreds, in the Quran. So you trace it back to your source, and so on and so forth. You can apply this to the things that are controversial, the things that are not, and so on and so forth. And then you can have a discussion about where do I source my knowledge from, and why is it important for me to be able to source my knowledge back to a source. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, قُلْ هَذِهِ سَبِيلِي أَدْعُو إِلَى اللَّهِ عَلَى بَصِيرَةٍ أَنَا وَمَنِ اتَّبَعَنِي وَسُبْحَانَ اللَّهِ وَمَا أَنَا مِنَ الْمُشْرِكِينَ. Say, this is my way, I invite to Allah with insight or with foresight, myself as well as those who follow me, and exalted is Allah, and I am not one of those who associate others with Him. All right, so now, our last section of the day, we finished the why. Today we did a brief, just talking about the where, Masadir al-Islam, the sources of your faith, and now finally, what? So, our Aqeedah, our belief system. When you believe in Islam, it makes you what? Muslim, right? Muslim is the noun form of Islam, or the actor or fa'il of Islam, which is a person who has Islam, or a person who observes Islam, correct? All right, so can you define Muslim to me? Or for me? Who can define Muslim? Yes? One who submits. That's the linguistic definition. So if somebody submits to the will of God. So yes, you're getting better, right? Because if somebody submits in wrestling, technically, linguistically, he's Muslim. Right? Technically. So it's not one who submits is an insufficient definition, correct? All right. So you said what's the next one? You were One who submits to the will of God. Okay. What else we got? What's define Muslim for me? Great, I like that one a lot. A person who believes in the 6 pillars of Iman and the 5 pillars of Islam. What else we got? Yeah.
That's it.
A person who believes in Allah and His messengers. All right. What else? So then, in that case, a Christian is a Muslim. He believes in Allah and His messengers,
Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
including Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
Yes.
All right. So what if somebody believes in Allah and His messengers, including Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he added another one?
They don't believe in Qudus. They don't believe in the Quran, for example.
So he didn't mention Kutubi. So let me get you guys in a groups of 3 or 4 and come up with a definition. In the Arabic language, there's a concept called al-had, al-jama', al-mani'. The definition that is encompassing and it is exclusive as well. So it encompasses the meaning we're trying to convey, but it also excludes the meanings that we don't want to convey. Does that make sense? So define Quran for me. Call it out.
The holy book of the Muslims.
Holy book of the Muslims. Okay. What else? Yeah. Okay. What else? We're going to be very specific, and you can get very technical depending on what you're sort of defining, and I guess what context it has. Let's say you're describing Islam to somebody who is not Muslim or has never met a Muslim or understands what it's about. So if you say someone who submits to the will of God, someone who believes in Allah and His messenger and His messengers, including Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, it may not fully encompass the meaning. So we're very close, by the way. We're very close. So let's take a minute, inshallah. Everybody speak to the people that are near you, groups of 2 or 3, or 3 or 4 rather, and just try to tighten this definition a little bit. We're almost there. We're very close. All right, let's do 2-3 minutes, inshallah, so we can wrap up. Define Muslim for me.
أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا
What's a Muslim? What Islam?
من هو المسلم؟
من هو المسلم? Muslim is the person that believes in Allah and follow the teaching of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Submits to the teaching of the Quran.
بس where I want to like for me right I'm thinking of the ayah in Surah Al-Hujurat قال الأعراب آمنا قل لم تؤمنوا ولكن كونوا أسلمنا. So there's a differentiation, right? So what defines Muslim specifically? So I would say pillars of Iman fall under Mu'min. They're not under Muslim.
Yeah.
So if we say what that would say under Aman, that would be and Muslim, what is قال العرب آمنا لم كلهم تؤمنوا ولكن كونوا أسلمنا. What is Islam?
Yeah, the capital.
That's what I'm saying. The bare minimum. I don't witness that there's no word worthy of worship. That's one. And I believe that Muhammad is his last and final prophet.
Yeah. But as a Muslim, it's an action word too, right? Muslim is an action word too, right? You submit the word of Allah and the teaching of the Prophet, right?
So any
The teaching of the Quran and
the one that's as a Lord.
صحيح. بعدين لك وين حطيت العرض مشكلة صغيرة في الكاميرا صارت انت كنت تقدر تشوفها عشان ما الناس وصلت يعني شوية حكيت فترة انه هذه بس انا حاطها على المسلمين هذا سكند بيرسون عشان اشوف ايش اللي بشوف الريكوردينج هي بس الكاميرا تاخذ من الكمبيوتر هذا it froze at some point apparently has to reboot.
I think it was on the camera, so yeah, I think you have to use the camera.
Yeah, so we have to.
Yeah, it's the first time it hasn't happened before. I think it's because in the heat. I felt the heat when I was putting the wires.
Pardon? Then we'll wire it again. Then we'll bring it down.
Yeah, then we bring it down.
We'll bring it down, yeah.
But we're gonna move this camera also.
Yeah.
Also, we're gonna move that camera, so it's not a problem.
Yeah, yeah.
The end of the مش كل الطلاب على المنصة ممكن تلفونك هناك إذا طلع مسج.
ما في مشكلة. Just text me or what about it, yeah, that's fine.
All right. Jazakum khair, everybody. Let's see some definitions. We're very close. And actually, I'm impressed. Jazakum khair, everybody. When I've asked this question before, it's usually been a slow burn. Like first person says, well, someone who believes in Allah, or someone who submits, and we start having to add puzzle pieces until we get a solid one. You guys went straight for it. We got really close. It's great. Only a little bit missing from what we already said. Let's see who's raising the hand first. Who wants to talk to answer? Yes.
A Muslim is a person who submits to the will of God, of a one true, all-powerful God, and follows the teachings of Muhammad and the Quran.
All right, perfect.
We did the perfect part.
That's a good definition.
We try to narrow it down to like one God. If we explain it, someone doesn't understand, they might interpret it as like some random God, so we're trying to like narrow it down to one.
Well, yeah, getting yourself in the headspace of, well, if I have to explain this to somebody who's not familiar with it. Because it's not fair to say, well, somebody who believes in the Quran, he's like, well, I don't know the Quran. Well, there's only so much you can say in a definition because you got to keep it simple and succinct, right? You can't just, give a one-page definition. But yeah, that's a good one. I like it. Great. I saw him here, right?
Yeah. A Muslim is one who believes in a single all-powerful God, the 6 articles of faith, 5 pillars of Islam, and would not hurt one physically or emotionally.
So you would not hurt others? You said it was the other one?
Right.
So based on the hadith, so I mean, I would remove that in terms of definition because we're talking about again, you would because they'll say, well, what if somebody hurts? It's jama', but it's not mana'. It doesn't exclude. Like, well, I know a Muslim who went to war. Like, well, yeah, that war was justified technically, and be like, well, now its definition is ruined, right? And it's not about like getting the perfect one, but it's about when the Prophet was asked, or when he was said, al-Muslim, man salima al-Muslimuna min lisanihi wa yadihi, that a Muslim is a person whose brothers and sisters are safe from his tongue and his hands, like he doesn't hurt and harm others. He was not giving a definition; he was describing, right? And that's fine to do so. So I mean, it's good that you included it based on because you were looking for a textual source, which is great. But it's a description rather than a definition. So and you see why it causes an issue because I saw he hurt somebody.
Yeah, I thought about that.
But it's great. The rest of it is perfect. What else we got? Anybody has anything different? Yes, sister.
Kind of to bounce off the thing about not hurting other people. I guess trying to be a better person.
Yes.
Is
I
that
like
better?
trying. So making a reasonable attempt. What do you think of that phrase?
Yeah, exactly.
Making a reasonable attempt. So who judges? So I'll give you the definition that I have. Anybody else have anything? Before I go? Anybody on this side? Or are you just matching what you saw here? That's what you came up with? Anybody? Yeah, that's pretty much it, right? I think you hit the nail on the head when you guys talked about the articles of faith. The pillars of Islam and the articles of faith. So a Muslim is a person who believes in the 5 pillars of Islam and the 6 articles of Iman and makes a reasonable attempt to follow or to act upon them. That's the definition that I find is most encompassing jama' manner. Yes.
So my question is, so if you include the articles of faith, right, doesn't Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make a differentiation on? So like I've heard like a tafsir of the ayah in Surah Al-Hujurat, he says, you know, وَقَالَ الْأَعْرَابُ آمَنَّا قُلْ لَمْ تُؤْمِنُوا وَلَكِنْ قُولُوا أَسْلَمْنَا, right? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is clearly making a distinction between Islam and Iman. So would it, including the articles of faith, you know, add an extra layer that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't find?
Jazakallah khairan. When we have, remember I had told you, we'll come back to the linguistic phenomenon of إذا اجتمع افترق وإذا افترق اجتمع, where two terms, this is a linguistic phenomenon, it's not religious. When two terms are used interchangeably until they meet. So there's an Arabic expression, it's very poetic. إذا اجتمع افترق وإذا افترق اجتمع. When they meet, they separate. When they separate, they meet. It's just a fun little way to explain it. And in a lot of linguistics and sciences and terms, certain terms are just used interchangeably. But when you're talking more, when you get more technical about it, then they separate. So when somebody tells you, I'm a believer, you're in the context of a message. They say, I'm a believer. What is they saying? I'm a Muslim, right? I'm a mu'min, I'm a Muslim. Do you guys differentiate between those two? In general, do you differentiate between a Muslim and a mu'min? It's all the same. It all means a Muslim, basically. We use Muslim in our modern context. It's just most encompassing. He's a Muslim, she's a Muslim. But when they come in, when you're having a more technical definition or discussion, iftaraqa. Now they have a separate meaning. Mu'min, which is higher level? Muslim or mu'min? Mu'min. Iman is higher than Islam. Why? Because Islam is the outward actions. Allah says, قُلْ لَمْ تُسْلِمُوا وَلَكِنْ قُلْ لَمْ تُؤْمِنُوا وَلَكِنْ قُلُوا أَسْلَمْنَا وَلَمَّا يَدْخُلِ الْإِيمَانُ فِي قُلُوبِكُم. Allah says, so Allah said in Surah Al-Hujurat, the last page, back in the day, which is very interesting, in our day and age, it's completely different. I want to be conscious of the time because I promised you guys. But back in the day, 1400 years ago, at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, the way people accepted faith was completely different than today. Today, it's vast majority across the world. It is individuals, one by one. So Islam enters the heart, and then they say Shahada. Back in the day, it was the exact opposite, and this is documented. The tribe would come, and a year before the Prophet ﷺ passed away, or a year or two, was referred to as Am al-Wufud, the year of delegations. He was now officially a local leader, more so than just a prophet. He was now a political leader, like a governor or emir of the place. So, and they had established themselves, the Muslims, as a power in the region. So people would come, delegations of officials, princes and other governors and so on. They would come and say, on behalf of, they would negotiate certain things politically. And then they would say, on behalf of my people, I've accepted Islam, and they would say the Shahada, and I'm going to go back, and the official religion of my city of 10,000 people is Islam now. So this prince or king or whatever would go back to their people, and they would say like a public ceremony of everyone raise your right hand, say Shahada, and they're officially Muslim. Now, a lot of the people are just like, they're on the religion of their kings. They're like, what just happened? Well, we just believe now, we're Muslims now. And لَمَّا يَدْخُلُ الْإِيمَانُ فِي قُلُوبِكُم, Iman has not yet entered your hearts. You have submitted, which is what Islam means linguistically. You have submitted to these rules. You have submitted that you're going to pray now. You have submitted to the concept that there's one God. But you don't actually believe it yet. So Allah says, Islam has not yet, Iman has not yet entered your hearts, which is the actions of Islam is meant to represent the belief that is within. Otherwise, it's just actions. You can make a robot pray all day. It's just a robot making movements, right? Whereas if a person believes in their heart, that's what should emanate the actions of being a good person, not wanting to harm others, praying to God, wanting to speak to God, making dua, hajj, umrah, etc. Seeking out what are God's teachings and how can I employ them in my life. So jazakallah, it is a differentiation, and time's out. Inshallah, next week we're gonna I'm gonna give it to you for homework. Inshallah, it's a very light read. It's maybe 3-4 pages. I don't recall. It's the second hadith in the 40 Nawawi hadith. I'll share the PDF and I'll have you guys read it. It's in which the hadith is very clear. It differentiates between Islam and Iman. Iman is a higher level, right? And it's because the true believer goes above and beyond just the basic actions of submitting of like prayer and the five pillars of Islam. But jazakallah khairan. So as a complete definition, believing in Allah and His messengers and His books and the angels and accountability and afterlife should result in you seeking a path towards Allah. And that path, based on what we talked about last week, if you want to be historically objective in terms of the ability to verify a divine scripture, it should lead you down the path to say, well, the only scripture that exists today, 2022, that I can verify to the best of my knowledge in terms of historical record, is still in the format that it was revealed in, is the Quran, and it will lead you to al-inqiyad, the awamir Allah, which is submitting to the rules of God. Which rules of God? There's hundreds of people claiming to represent God. Well, that's your duty as a human being in this era. Is to say, well, I'm gonna search for the most authentic route to God, the most verifiable route to God, and that leads you down to becoming a believer. And now you are submitting with iman. Does that answer the question? So it's very important. It does differentiate, but a person who believes in the pillars of Islam and iman and makes a reasonable attempt to act upon them. So one last thing, and I'll take a minute, and I don't want to dwell on this, because the concept of telling someone you're not a Muslim is not our duty. It's not our job. The Prophet ﷺ said, in authentic hadith, if somebody tells his brother or sister you're a kafir, you're a disbeliever, and it's not true, they're not, the person didn't actually leave the faith, then the curse comes back on the person. Who are you to judge who's a believer and who's not? However, as a society, as Muslims, there has to be a definition. Like, our words have to mean something, right? If somebody tells you now, you mentioned Shia earlier, are Shia Muslim or not?
Yes.
Who says yes? Raise your hand. Who says no? Raise your hand.
What was the question again?
Are Shia Muslim or not? You said yes? Who says I'm not sure? Honestly, I've heard both.
I think the spectrum.
The spectrum, great.
Because within Shi'ism, there's a spectrum of like they're
Also within Sunnis as well, right? Same concept. But Shias is like, because I'm appealing to the bias here. It's very important because it's very important to be honest with ourselves. It's good that a lot of you say, well, I don't know, I've heard both, right? Well, here's the thing: they are Muslim, of course, but now you have a rubric. Well, let me run it through. Does this person or this sect or this group, do they believe in the 5 pillars of Islam? Yes. Do they believe in the 6 pillars of Iman? Yes. Do they make a reasonable attempt to follow them? And if you just limit it to the other two, because who can judge a reasonable attempt? Meaning there's no clear-cut violations of that. Disregarding Hajj is no longer, like certain sects here in America, they say Hajj is no longer an obligation. It was for back then. You're like, whoa, that's a pillar of our faith. Why is it important? Well, it's not our job to judge. By the way, Shia are Muslim, overwhelmingly, yes. Now, there might be some extremist sects, just like there exists in Sunnism, who are like, well, we believe in another prophet after the Prophet Muhammad. We're going to get to, when we get to, like in 2 sessions from now, al-iman bil-rusul, belief in the messengers, is part and parcel of it, is believing that Muhammad was the final messenger. So once you've violated that, well, you've added a messenger. Once you've added 1, why not add 50? Why not add 100? You've opened that door, and you don't have any verifiable proof for that next one. So that means anybody can come, and now you've opened that door, it'll never be closed, and everybody's Muslim. It's either you have a definition for the claim, for the term, or you don't. So if somebody said, well, you can't judge, what if somebody violates the pillars of Islam, violates the pillars of Iman, and says, well, I don't believe in angels, it's pillar. I don't believe in angels, that's nonsense. When God mentions angels in the Quran, he just means that it's a metaphor. Like they're on thin ice now, but when they go like, oh, well, no, I don't believe in hell at all. That's starting to become a thing now. Where God is all love, hell was just, to make you do good things, or that was inserted later to scare people into doing good. Well, now you've rejected a completely recurring, it's in every scripture. And it's clearly, there's an agenda here. Maybe if the individual himself doesn't know they're part of an agenda, that's a different story. But now you've violated a pillar. So you can say with clarity that, well, if a person believes in that, they're not Muslim. And there shouldn't be a pressure on you to say, well, again, it's not your duty or my duty to say, oh, announce who you announce it to and who cares about your announcement. But the point is, if you don't know what makes a Muslim, and you don't know what breaks a Muslim, then Muslim doesn't mean literally anything at all. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? If somebody tells you, I'm a parent, how many parents here raise your hand? So, Mashallah, somebody didn't raise their hand. How many parents are here? Okay, Mashallah. May Allah bless you all, and may Allah grant beautiful children to the rest. So, and patience. So let's say I don't have any kids, and I say, well, I feel like a parent, and I think you can't judge me that I'm going to go to the parents, only seminar or whatever, like whatever perks parents can get. I'll go there and I'll say, well, I teach kids in school and stuff, so I feel like I'm a parent, so I should be defined as a parent too.
New gender movements, same concept.
Same concept. Well, if words don't mean anything anymore, and you're not allowed to tell me that I can take on a new term with a different definition than what the term is supposed to stand for, and you're not allowed to tell me well, that term doesn't apply to you, then what the word even mean after that? I'm Muslim. I don't believe in God. I don't believe in Allah, but I'm Muslim. What does that even mean? It's not about, again, the goal is not, oh, well, kafir, this guy's not Muslim. It's about, well, if Muslim ceases to mean anything anymore, what does that mean for you and your kids? How can you pass on something that doesn't have any definition? Like, I can't even encompass this thing. I can't even pass it down. I don't have any pillars. I don't have any definition for it. So that becomes problematic. That's the world we're in today, and it's a problem. Because people tell you, well, you can't have definitions, certain highly charged terms, certain highly charged concepts, religion, and social issues. They say, well, you're not allowed to tell me that this sect is not Muslim. So, popular sect here in parts of the world, they believe in a prophet. They claim he's a prophet, that he came in the 1900s, and so on and so forth. And they say he was Jesus, he was a prophet, he was this, he was that. You're like, well, they do everything else in Islam, but they say this guy was a prophet, and they insist on it. So you can reasonably say, well, if somebody insists on that, because of course there's requirements. Again, the idea here is not to say this guy's kafir, that kafir, but the idea is you got to define your parameters, otherwise your word means nothing. And if your word means nothing, I guarantee you, it'll be the first to go away. Because it means nothing. You can't hold on to, you can't capture anything that will just keep falling between your fingers. It's wet with water, right? So you have to have a definition that is jama' ma'na, it is encompassing to what you believe in, but it also excludes that which you don't believe in. Otherwise, you'll never be able to pass something down to the next generation. You'll never have anything to hold on to, no heritage, no tradition, and no meaning. If words can be breached, I'm a parent even though I have no kids, and you can't tell me otherwise, then what does parent even mean? Well, then that guy's a parent too. This door is a parent too. Like, the word no longer means anything. Once you've breached it with no parameters or no justification for why you breached it, the door's open. And you can breach it another 100 times. And because you couldn't say anything to the first guy, you're definitely not going to say anything to the 100th guy. All right? So, jazakumullah khairan, everybody. We'll stop right there. I will send you the PDF in the group, in the WhatsApp group. I'll put my number here because I think some of you might not be in the WhatsApp group. And I don't know if it's too many people, I don't know if I'll be able to keep up communications. We'll have to find another way. But
You can put my number. I can put the answer.
okay. So should I erase this so they're not confused? Okay. All right. Any questions or comments? Yes. I can't hear you. I need you to raise your voice. For Muslim? For the word Muslim. A Muslim is a person who believes in the pillars of Islam and the 5 pillars of Islam, the 6 articles of Iman, and makes a reasonable attempt to follow them, to act upon them. Yeah?
If you are not in the WhatsApp group and you want to load the videos, use this number 908-265-1141, and I'll add you to the group through Sister Hamza.
All right. Any other questions or comments? Yes.
If you want to verify something belief, how do I do it?
You want to verify if a belief is Islamic?
No. Like, for example, make the Zohar example. How can I verify that Zohar is that time and direction? Like,
Great.
anything, you can plus anything else.
So you have to start somewhere. So this is with the Quran and